Cameras were rolling, the crowd buzzed with anticipation. France's most watched political show, Favor, was about to begin. The guest? Captain Ibrahim Traoré, a revolutionary, a leader, a man some feared and many followed. But this wasn't going to be a respectful dialogue. Behind the scenes, something ugly was brewing. Enter the host, Marc Delarme, famous for his smug smile, elitist tone, and veiled insults, especially when African leaders were involved. Tonight he came loaded. Traoré entered the studio in a simple charcoal suit. No medals, no fanfare, just those focused, unflinching eyes. He greeted the crew with grace. Marc didn't even stand to shake his hand. Then, red light, live, Marc leaned forward, smirking. "President Traoré," he began, "or should I call you Rebel Commander?" A soft gasp ran through the audience, but Traoré's face didn't twitch, not a muscle. Marc continued, "Do you actually believe you belong at the table with real-world leaders?" What he didn't know was that this would be his last smug laugh on national television. The room froze. Marc looked around, expecting applause, but the crowd was quiet. Ibrahim leaned back slowly. He didn't look at Marc. He turned and locked eyes with a young black girl sitting in the front row, her eyes wide, shining with something between fear and admiration, hope. Only then he spoke. "In my country," he said calmly, "we don't measure a man's worth by the medals on his suit, but by how many children sleep safely because of him." Silence, electric. Marc squirmed. "Well, you've been accused of—" Ibrahim raised his hand, not in anger, in discipline. "Let me finish." The audience leaned forward. "You?" Could hear someone's heart beat. "Men like you," he said slowly, "think power is a tie in Paris. Real power is standing in front of your people when the bullets start flying and refusing to run." Gasps. Marc's lips twitched. He was slipping, and he knew it. Then Ibrahim leaned forward. "You ask if I belong with world leaders? I ask, do they belong with their people?" Backstage, chaos. The control room held its breath. A producer whispered. He flipped it. The director replied, "No, he owns it." Marc tried to strike back. "That's poetic, Captain. But poetry doesn't stop terrorists." Ibrahim paused. His jaw clenched, just once, then relaxed. "You're right," he said. "Poetry doesn't, but dignity does. Hope does. A leader without hope is more dangerous than any gunman." And then Ibrahim reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This," he said, holding it carefully, "is a letter from a 9-year-old girl in Kaya. Her village was attacked, her father gone, but she still wrote to thank me for keeping her school open." His voice cracked, not from weakness, but from memory. He read it aloud. The words shook the air like a drumbeat in silence. Even the cameraman's hands began to tremble. Marc sat, silent, defeated. This wasn't an interview anymore. It was a reckoning, and it was far from over. Suddenly a voice from the audience, a woman, dark-skinned, modestly dressed. Tears already flowing. She stood. No microphone, just raw courage. "I know you," she said softly. "My father told me stories of leaders like you. Men who bled for their people, not for glory." Marc tried to interrupt. "Ma'am." Nitrogen monoxide, she shouted, voice trembling. You mock him. But you've never had to hold a dying child. You've never had to bury your neighbor and return to lead. You don't know what courage looks like. The studio froze. Ibrahim didn't move. He simply looked at her. She whispered, You're not just a guest here. You're hope. And that word hung in the air like smoke after fire. Hope. This wasn't just television. This was history. And it was live. Mark looked lost. The pen in his hand trembled slightly. His smirk was gone. For the first time, he understood this wasn't politics. This was pain. History. And the quiet awakening of a lion. By dawn, the internet had caught fire. TikTok exploded with looped clips of the woman crying, You're not just a guest, you're hope. That single phrase, echoed in 100 languages, shared in thousands of reels, posted across millions of hearts. And beside her, in every frame, was Ibrahim Traoré, silent, still, unshaken, no fury, no retaliation, just dignity. In Ouagadougou, students marched peacefully, cardboard signs in hand. Hope wears a uniform. Our voice is no longer silent. In a Paris cafe, a little African boy watched the clip on a tablet. He turned to his mother and asked, Is he a king? She smiled softly. No, something better. He's a servant of his people. But not everyone was smiling. Mark's network spiraled into crisis. Sponsors threatened to walk. Comment. Sections turned into battlegrounds. One viewer wrote, He didn't just lose an interview. He lost his place in history. And through it all, Ibrahim Traoré said nothing. No tweet, no post, no press statement. Because when a lion walks, he doesn't need to roar. His silence is enough to shake the jungle. The studio called his team, desperate. Please, we need him back. No interruptions. 1 full hour, total respect. But Traoré didn't answer. At evening, he was seen walking alone through the streets of Lyon. No cameras, no aides, just a quiet visit to a refugee shelter tucked between forgotten buildings. A little girl ran up to him, hugged him tight. They say you're like magic, she whispered. He knelt beside her and replied, I'm just a man, but magic happens when people believe in each other. Back at the hotel, his assistant approached him, invitation in hand. Official, stamped, begging. Ibrahim read it slowly, set it down, and said quietly, Tell them I accept. Then he paused, looked out the window. But this time, I'll bring my brothers with me. His assistant blinked. Which brothers, sir? Ibrahim smiled, just slightly. The ones who remember what it means to stand. Ibrahim Traoré returns, but this time he's not alone. And what happened next changed the show forever. Narrator voice low, steady. The assistant asked gently, Who will come with you, sir? Traoré smiled. Those whose voices were never invited. This wasn't a return. It was a reckoning. This time Ibrahim didn't walk into the studio alone. He entered silently, and behind him followed a line of guests. No cameras had been warned. No credits. Rolled. But the ground beneath the studio had already begun to shift. They came without applause, without armor, but carrying stories the world had long ignored. A nurse from Bamako, a war orphan from Sudan, a professor from Dar es Salaam. Men, women, Children, each carried truth and silence that demanded to be heard. Mark, the host, stood up, tried to smile, but his lips trembled. The audience saw it. Ibrahim shook his hand gently. "Thank you for inviting us," he said. "We've brought some truths with us." They sat down. No fanfare. Just, wait. The red light turned on. History pressed record. The nurse spoke first. No script. No drama. She held up a photo. A hospital turned to ash. "This was my clinic," she said. "Terrorists burned it down. President Traoré sent. Help within 48 hours. No headlines, no tweets, just help." Mark looked for words, but none arrived. Then the professor leaned forward. "My university was about to close." He gave up his own salary to keep it running, not once, but twice. No one clapped. Because awe doesn't clap, it listens. Then came the final voice. A boy, no older than 12, small frame, big soul. He stood shaking, took a breath. I don't have a papa," he whispered. "I live in a camp." A hush fell. One day, President Traoré came. No camera, no bodyguards, just him. I told him I want to be a soldier. He said, "No, be a builder. Build what they tried to destroy." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a small, worn French book. He gave me this, and dreams. The studio couldn't breathe. Even the cameraman stopped filming, just watched. Mark's eyes darted. His hands twitched. He'd lost the room. But instead of silence, he exploded. "Enough of this emotional circus," he shouted. "You're a president, not a preacher. This is politics, not a therapy session." Gasps, tension, snapped like a wire under pressure. But Ibrahim didn't blink. He leaned in, voice calm, unshaken. "Maybe," he said, "you confuse volume with power. Let me show you what power really is." He opened a folder. Suddenly, the studio screens lit up. Real-time government data from Burkina Faso. Footage. Numbers. Maps. Rural schools reopening. Farmers receiving new seed grants. Children getting access to clean water. No slogans, just results. Mark's mouth hung open. The audience, stunned, began to clap. Not the polite kind. Not the forced kind. The soulful kind. The kind that comes from seeing truth stand its ground. Backstage, an assistant filmed the moment on her phone, just in time to capture Ibrahim turning calmly toward Mark and saying, "History won't remember insults, but it will never forget impact." That clip hit the internet like lightning. 1 million views in 45 minutes, 10 million by sunset, global by midnight. In Burkina Faso, boys huddled around dusty radios, replaying his words like they were prophecy. In France, celebrities shared the video, stunned into silence. Even critics whispered. He didn't shout, he simply stood. After the show, Mark stormed into the green room. His hands shook as he poured a glass of water. But it wasn't the man that had broken him. It was what the man carried. Truth, vision, grief, hope. Then the door creaked open. Ibrahim entered, alone, no cameras, no lights. Mark looked up, no words left. Traoré stepped forward, looked him in the eyes, and said, "The world doesn't need more loud men. It needs brave ones." Mark didn't speak. He simply sat down. The chair across from him was empty now, but the echo of what had just happened still filled the room like thunder that wouldn't stop. He didn't know it yet, but his life had changed, and so had millions of others. By morning, the video had crossed borders, not just digital ones, but emotional, spiritual, generational. In Ouagadougou, an old man wiped his eyes. "That's my president," he whispered to his grandchildren. In Paris, a little African girl hugged her mother. "He looks like us. He speaks from the heart." Across European newsrooms, reporters scrambled for spin. "Too emotional," some sighed. "Too dangerous," whispered others. But one truth remained. The people had heard him, and the people were rising. Back in a quiet room at the presidential residence in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim sat with his team. No celebrations, no speeches, just silence and thought, because something had begun, and it could not be undone. His phone buzzed. "An unknown number," he answered. A trembling voice in broken French. "I don't know if this is really you, but thank you." It was Miriam, a nurse in the north. "My son watched your interview and said, 'Mama, I want to be like him.'" Ibrahim's voice cracked. He didn't say much, just 2 words, "Thank you." Then, quietly, he walked to the window. The Eiffel Tower glowed in the distance, but his heart was in Kaya, in Dore, in the dust of Bobo Dioulasso. This wasn't about television anymore. This was about dignity. Somewhere else, Mark couldn't sleep. He watched the clip again, and again, and again. He had mocked a man who carried nations. He had spoken over pain and tried to dress it up as journalism. But the world didn't cancel him. Worse, they ignored him. Whispers grew in the studio. "Replace him. His time is over. He doesn't get it." And for once in his life, Mark chose humility. He returned to that same studio, no audience, no applause, just him, a camera, and truth. "I disrespected a man who represents something I didn't understand," he said. "I was arrogant. I was wrong." The clip didn't go viral, but Ibrahim saw it, and he smiled, not because he had won, but because truth had finally been heard. All across Africa, people weren't just watching, they were feeling. In Accra, students marched with handmade signs. "You spoke for U.S." In Bamako, elders sat around old radios, nodding slowly, silent, proud. In refugee camps, children mimicked his calm tone. Hope is stronger than fear. There were no protests, only pride. There were no slogans, only silence that spoke like thunder. A letter arrived at the presidency. From a mother. She never thought it would be read. "President Ibrahim," she wrote, "my son died last year in a terrorist attack. We buried him without a flag. Today I watched you on French TV. I cried, not because I was sad, but because for the first time I felt seen. Thank you for making us proud to belong to this land." Signed. A grieving mother. Ibrahim held the letter for a very long time. Then, quietly, he walked outside into the hotel courtyard, looked up at the stars and whispered, for all of them, "I will not stop." 6 days later, he returned to Ouagadougou. No red carpet, no parade, no orchestra, but tens of thousands stood along the road, hand on heart, children, elders, farmers, students, no signs, just silence and love. He stepped off the plane, paused, and simply nodded, because he had already said everything that mattered. That moment, a man walking with no applause, no words, no armor, became the most shared video of the year. He hadn't fought with anger. He had fought with dignity, and the world had listened forever.